Say, I am that I am, over your money, the name heaven answers to. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the words you speak over your life become the very law of your life. And tonight, we bring that teaching to the one place you have almost never dared to speak it, over your money, over the account you check with a tight stomach, over the bills that arrive like small accusations, over the number that has felt, for so long, like it was simply who you are. There is a moment in the book of Exodus that most people read as ancient history, but Florence Scovel Shinn read it as a daily instruction. Moses stands before the burning bush and asks God what name he should give the people, and the answer comes back in Exodus chapter 3 verse 14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. And Florence Scovel Shinn would stop you right there and say, do you see it? God did not give a title. God did not give a list of qualities. God gave a name that is pure declaration, a name that simply announces its own being into existence. And she taught that this is the pattern for you too. Whatever you say after the words I am, you are summoning. So if you have been saying, I am broke, I am behind, I am not enough for the bills this month, you have been speaking a small, sad name over your own life and calling it the truth, when the real truth is that the very same power that answered Moses is waiting on your lips right now, waiting to be spoken correctly, over your money, over your supply, over every closed door you have been calling permanent. And here is the part that will feel like a small mercy. You did not fail to manifest because you lacked faith. You manifested exactly what you named. So the good news underneath the hard news is that the mechanism has been working perfectly all along, which means it will work just as perfectly the moment you change the name. Say it with me. I am that I am. I am the presence of infinite supply moving through my life right now. My word is my wand. Again, I am that I am. I am the presence of infinite supply moving through my life right now. My word is my wand. If something in you just went quiet when you heard that, type the 2 words God supplies in the comments right now. Let it be your seal that you receive this, not as a nice idea to admire, but as your own new name over your own money starting today. The first key is this. The 2 words I am are the most powerful sentence you will ever speak, more powerful than any prayer that begins by asking, because asking still stands outside the door knocking. While I am walks straight through it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that whatever you attach to those 2 small words, you are legally, spiritually, and financially binding yourself to. So when a woman says, I am always broke by the end of the month, she is not describing her bank account, she is decreeing it. She is standing at her own personal burning bush and giving her circumstances a name, and the circumstances, being obedient servants, simply comply. This is not punishment, this is law, the same law that will just as obediently comply the instant she says something else. Think for a moment of a man named in no story but 1,000 living rooms, who for years introduced himself, even only in the privacy of his own mind, with the words, I am always the one who falls behind. He did not mean it as prophecy, he meant it as description, a small shrug of a sentence. But Florence Scovel Shinn would tell you there is no such thing as a small sentence spoken after I am, because the words that follow those 2 are never observations, they are instructions, and the universe, being a faithful servant rather than a critic, simply carries out the instruction it was given. So he fell behind, again and again, not because life was unfair to him, but because his own mouth kept renewing the order. And here is the part that must land gently. He did not need more discipline. He did not need a better budget. He needed a new name. The day he began saying instead, I am current, I am provided for, I am never left wanting, something in the very texture of his months began to shift. Not instantly, not like a lightning bolt, but the way a tide turns, quietly, and then all at once, This is not that his old sentence was foolish. It is that it was simply believed too easily and repeated too often. So pause for a moment and notice the sentence you reach for most often when money comes up in conversation. Is it, "I am always short," "I am not good with money," "I am waiting for things to get better"? Or is it something that sounds like the name in the burning bush? It is not that your bank account is stubborn. It is that your words have been more consistent than your wishes. And the moment you notice that, you are already halfway free, because you cannot unhear it. Once you have heard it, every time you catch yourself starting a sentence with "I am," treat it the way Moses treated that bush. Take off your shoes. You are standing on holy ground, and holy ground is not the place to plant a complaint. It is the place to plant a name that heaven itself will answer to. This week, every single time you feel a scarcity sentence rising in your throat, stop mid-breath and replace it, not with wishful thinking, but with the plain declaration, "I am that I am supplied." Let that be the small rebellion you practice quietly, in traffic, in the checkout line, in the mirror before you leave the house. And watch how quickly your own ear begins to expect the new sentence instead of the old one. Because a name spoken once is a wish, but a name spoken daily becomes a dwelling place, and you were never meant to live in the old one. I am that I am, and my supply is already arranged. The second key is this: money is never the enemy. Your name for money is. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that supply is a spiritual idea before it is ever a physical one, and that the visible dollar is simply the last link in a very long chain that begins in consciousness. So when someone tells you money is the root of all evil, notice they are misquoting an old verse and mistaking a symptom for a cause. It is not money that corrupts, it is the fear of not having it, the clutching, the apologizing for wanting it, the secret shame of needing it. That is what curdles in a person. Meanwhile, money itself, in Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching, is simply frozen supply, an idea made visible, no more sinister than water taking the shape of the glass that holds it. So it is not that money is unspiritual. It is that most people have never given it a spiritual name. They have called it dirty, called it hard to get, called it something other people have and they do not, and then wondered why it treated them the way they described it. Think of a woman who inherited from her grandmother not property, but a phrase her grandmother used to say, "We are not the kind of people money comes easy to." And that woman repeated it for 30 years without ever noticing she was reciting a family curse dressed up as humility, until the day she learned to say instead, "I am the kind of person supply flows to easily," and within months, not because the universe suddenly softened, but because her own naming changed. Opportunities she had walked past for a decade began to look different in her eyes. This is the quiet miracle of the second key. The money did not change. Her name for it did. And Florence Scovel Shinn would tell you plainly, stop scolding money for being scarce, and start blessing it for being present. Bless the dollar in your hand before you spend it. Bless the check before you deposit it. Speak over it the way you would speak over a guest you actually wanted in your home. Because money, like every form of energy, moves toward welcome and away from suspicion. And consider how differently two people can handle the very same paycheck. One opens the envelope, sighs, and mutters, "This will be gone before I know it." And true to the word, it is gone before she knows it, because she has decreed its disappearance before she has even spent it. The other opens an identical envelope and says quietly, "Thank you, this is supply," and it is enough. And somehow, without any dramatic change in the numbers, that same amount seems to stretch further, cover more, breathe easier. And Florence Scovel Shinn would tell you, this is not coincidence. This is consciousness shaping circumstance in real time. It is not that one woman is luckier with money. It is that one of them is arguing with it, and one of them is blessing it. And money, like a servant, tends to serve the household where it is welcomed, rather than the one where it is resented. Notice, too, how many ordinary words carry the old curse without anyone noticing. Expensive, said with a flinch. Tight, said with a sigh. Broke, said as casually as commenting on the weather. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that these are not neutral observations. They are small verdicts, spoken again and again, until they harden into personal law. And consider a second story alongside the first. A man who ran a small repair shop out of his garage for years, and every single time a customer paid him, he would say, half joking, "Well, that will just go straight back out the door." And it always did. Not because his prices were wrong, but because he had trained his own money to leave the instant it arrived. He had named it a visitor rather than a resident, until one season he began, quietly, without telling anyone, to say instead, as each payment came in, "This stays and multiplies. This is the beginning of more." And he later said the strangest part was not that the money suddenly grew all at once. It was that he simply stopped being surprised when it did, because he had finally given it a name that expected to stay, rather than a name that expected to flee. And this is worth pausing on, because so many people believe they are managing money with their budgets and their spreadsheets, when in truth, they are managing it far more powerfully with their mouths. A budget can only organize what is already flowing, but the name you speak over money decides how much is willing to flow there in the first place. So bless even the bill. Do not merely tolerate it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a bill paid with resentment is a small, quiet curse renewed every month. But a bill paid with the words "thank you for this service already rendered" becomes instead a receipt of your own overflowing supply. This week, try a simple and almost playful practice. Every time a bill or a price or a number crosses your hands, before any old reflex can speak, say silently or aloud, "I bless this, it is supply," and watch how strange it feels at first, and how natural it becomes by the fifth or sixth time, because you are not managing your money differently, you are renaming it, and the renaming is where the real work of the second key is done. I bless my money, and call it good, and it multiplies. The third key is this: the tongue is not a passive reporter of your life. It is the wand that shapes it. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote of the word as a wand, meaning that speech is not decoration on top of belief. Speech is the tool that carves belief into form, the way water, moving over the same stone long enough, does not merely touch the stone, it carves a channel into it. And once the channel is carved, everything that follows naturally flows along that same groove. This is why the affirmation you spoke tonight ends the way it does. My word is my wand. Not my word is my wish. Not my word is my hope. My word is my wand. A wand does not request. A wand enacts. So it matters enormously. More than most people ever suspect, what you say casually about money in an ordinary conversation, the offhand line, "Oh, we can never afford that." The reflexive joke, "I am always one payment behind." These are not harmless small talk. They are wand strokes, drawn again and again over the same spot until the shape becomes permanent. It is not that speaking negatively is impolite. It is that it is structurally identical to prayer. And prayer, even careless prayer, tends to be answered. Consider a young mother standing in a store with her children, and the toy on the shelf, and the automatic sentence that leaves her mouth before she has even thought about it. "We can't afford that." She does not mean it cruelly. She barely notices she has said it at all. But her children hear it, and more importantly, she hears it. And the wand in her hand traces the line one more time, deeper than before. And the strange part is that the very same afternoon, she may in fact have money sitting untouched in an account. The sentence was never really about the number. It was about the groove already carved into her speech, long before she reached that shelf. And Florence Scovel Shinn would ask her gently, and she would ask you the same. What if instead you paused, just for one breath, and said, We are choosing something else today. The children hear a completely different lesson in that sentence. Not lack, but choice. Not a closed door, but a hand still holding the wand on purpose. So Florence Scovel Shinn would have you become, in her words, a careful and scientific speaker, not a superstitious one, not someone who is afraid to say the word poor out loud for fear of jinxing themselves, but someone who understands calmly that words are causal, and who therefore chooses them the way a builder chooses materials, not out of fear, but out of respect for what they will become. Notice too how differently the body receives the two sentences, "I can't afford it," and "I am choosing not to spend on that right now." One lands in the chest like a small locked door, the other lands like a hand resting easily on the handle. The bank balance may be the identical number in both cases, but the inner state, the self-concept being reinforced, could not be more different. And it is always the inner state, not the outer number, that heaven answers to. This is true not only of what you say about your own money, but of what you repeat about money in general, the tired lines you inherited without ever examining them. Money doesn't grow on trees. You have to work yourself to the bone for every dollar. Nobody gets ahead anymore. These are one strokes too, spoken so often across a whole culture that people mistake them for simple fact, rather than what they truly are. A shared groove worn into common speech by generations of careless repetition. And you are not obligated to keep tracing a groove simply because it is old. This week, listen to your own sentences, the way you would listen to a rough draft you still have full permission to revise. Every time the old one stroke starts to fall, catch your own hand mid-air and redraw the line, slowly at first if needed, until the new groove becomes the one your speech falls into naturally. My word is my wand, and I draw only what I wish to keep. The fourth key is this, and it is the one most people never examine, because it hides inside the ordinary hours of an ordinary day, not in the dramatic moments, not in the crisis, but in the small, unremarkable minutes that make up the bulk of a life. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that consciousness is not shaped in the rare emergency, it is shaped in the repetition of the everyday, which means the fourth key is not asking you to examine the worst day you ever had. It is asking you to examine an average Tuesday, the kind of day so unremarkable you would never think to call it spiritually significant. And that is exactly why it is the most significant day of all, because it is the day you actually live, over and over, disguised as different dates on a calendar. Before we walk that Tuesday together, understand the mechanism underneath it, because it is not that any single sentence about money carries enormous weight all on its own. A stray complaint in an elevator will not sink a life by itself. It is that these sentences behave the way small sums behave when they are left quietly compounding, unseen, in an account nobody thinks to check. A little added here, a little added there, and for a long while it looks like nothing at all is happening. And then one day, the total arrives, and it is astonishing. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word works precisely this way. It does not spend itself once and vanish. It accumulates, silently, the way interest accumulates on a balance whether or not anyone is watching the ledger. So the fourth key is really an invitation to look honestly at what you have been quietly depositing all day long. Every single day, for years, because whatever you have been depositing is exactly what has been compounding. Follow one such Tuesday, an ordinary one, and watch how many times the old name for money gets spoken without anyone ever noticing it was a decree. The alarm goes off, and before the feet even touch the floor, before coffee, before a single word to another human being, the mind runs its first quiet script of the day, something like, another day, another bill, and already a one-stroke has been made. At breakfast, scrolling the news, a headline about rising prices, and the reflexive thought, we can never keep up, another stroke. In the car, a co-worker mentions a raise she received, and the immediate internal comment, "Must be nice, some people just have it easy." Another stroke. And notice, this one is dressed as envy, but envy is simply a scarcity decree wearing a disguise, because to say some people just have it easy is to simultaneously declare I do not. At the office, a client cancels, and the thought arrives instantly, "Of course, nothing ever goes my way." Another stroke. At lunch, a friend suggests a restaurant, and the answer comes fast, "Oh, that is too expensive for me." Another stroke. Notice, not, "It is not what I choose to spend on today, but that is too expensive for me." A small phrase, but it is a signature on the account of self-concept. In the afternoon, paying a bill online, and the sigh that escapes before typing the amount, and the thought, "There goes another one," another stroke, mid-afternoon, half asleep at the desk. The tired thought drifts through unbidden, "I will probably be doing this same tired grind forever." Another stroke. On the drive home, passing a nice house, and the thought, "We will never have that." Another stroke. At dinner, the topic of the children's school trip comes up, and the tight voice that says, "We will have to see if we can manage it." Another stroke. And later, scrolling in bed before sleep, an advertisement for something lovely appears, and the last conscious thought of the day is, "That is not for people like us." One final stroke laid down just before the mind goes quiet, and by the time that ordinary Tuesday ends, without one single dramatic event, without one crisis, that person has spoken the sentence of lack 10 separate times, each one small, each one forgettable, and each one, according to everything Florence Scovel Shinn taught, a full and complete decree, spoken with the same wand that spoke the affirmation earlier tonight, and deposited, quietly, into the very same account that has been compounding for years. And here is the part that must be said gently but plainly. It is not that this person is unlucky. It is that they have been unconsciously prolific in prayer, praying lack 10 times a day without ever kneeling once. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn insisted that half-hearted affirmation in the morning cannot outrun 10 sincere decrees of lack through the rest of the day. It is not a fair fight, and it was never meant to be treated as one. Picture it plainly for a moment. One quiet minute of "I am supplied," spoken over coffee, set against 10 louder minutes of lack scattered through the rest of the day. Which one do you think heaven is more likely to answer? It is not that the morning affirmation failed, it is that it was outvoted. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word does not average itself out kindly, it accumulates. The way small deposits and small withdrawals both accumulate in an account, whether or not anyone is watching the ledger closely. So let us look at this from another angle, because the fourth key deserves more than one glance. Think of a shopkeeper during a slow season, standing behind the counter, and every customer who walks in for weeks hears the very same greeting. "Business has just been terrible this year. Hasn't it been terrible for everyone?" said lightly, almost as small talk, almost as connection, and Florence Scovel Shinn would tell you plainly that this sentence carries double weight, because it is not only believed quietly within, it is now spoken aloud, witnessed, confirmed by nodding strangers, sealed again and again in front of an audience, until the shopkeeper has, without ever intending to, built an entire congregation agreeing daily with his own decree of lack. And business, being obedient to consciousness rather than to chance, tends to answer accordingly. A woman does not lose her prosperity in one great catastrophic sentence either. She loses it a teaspoon at a time, in the parking lot, in the checkout line, in the space of small talk where no one imagines anything spiritual is happening at all. This is precisely why Florence Scovel Shinn placed so much weight on the ordinary, because the extraordinary moments are rare and therefore easy to watch carefully. But the ordinary moments arrive by the dozen and slip past unguarded, and it is the unguarded moment, she taught, where the old name for money does its steadiest work. So the fourth key asks something specific of you. not simply to affirm well in the quiet morning moment, but to become a noticer across the entire day, to feel the old sentence rising the way you would feel a sneeze coming, and to catch it before it fully forms. This does not require you to become tense or self-policing. It requires only honesty and a small pause. So let us do the exercise together right now. Pause for a moment and pick one real sentence you know you say often about money. Something you have said this very week. Hold it in your mind. Hear your own voice saying it. And now, just as clearly, choose the new sentence that will stand in its place starting tomorrow morning. Say it once quietly to yourself. And notice, this is not pretending, this is redrafting. The same wand, a cleaner line, deposited now into the very same account that once only received the old one. Because here is the mercy inside the fourth key. You do not have to fix 9 years of old sentences in one sitting, and you certainly do not have to reverse 10 years of compounding in a single afternoon. You only have to become someone who notices the next deposit, and Florence Scovel Shinn taught that consciousness, once awakened even slightly, cannot fully go back to sleep. The noticing itself is already the turning. Imagine that same Tuesday lived again. Alarm goes off, and instead of another day, another bill, the thought arrives. I am supplied today, at breakfast. Instead of we can never keep up, the thought, my supply moves faster than any headline, in the car. Instead of, must be nice, the thought, I bless her raise and expect my own increase. At the office, instead of nothing ever goes my way, the thought, this cancellation makes room for something better suited to me. At lunch, instead of too expensive for me, the thought, I choose simply today, and I trust abundance tomorrow, paying the bill. Instead of the sigh, the words, thank you for this service already rendered, I release this gladly, mid-afternoon. Instead of the tired thought of an endless grind, the quiet reminder, my circumstances are already changing, whether or not I can see it yet. Driving past the nice house, instead of we will never have that. The thought, I am glad such things exist. They remind me of what is possible. At dinner, instead of we will have to see, the words, let us plan for yes, and before sleep, instead of that is not for people like us, the gentle closing thought, supply is already moving toward me even now, while I rest, and watch how differently that Tuesday closes. Not because the bank balance changed in a single day. Changes in the visible world always lag slightly behind changes in the invisible one. But because 10 decrees of supply were spoken instead of 10 decrees of lack, and quietly deposited into the very same compounding account that used to work against this person for years, and Florence Scovel Shinn would tell you, plainly and without exaggeration, that a week of Tuesdays like the second one will rearrange a life, not through one dramatic breakthrough, but through the slow accumulating weight of 100 small corrected sentences. The same law of compounding that once seemed to work against you, now quietly working for you instead, invisibly, until the total is astonishing. The way a single degree of change in direction, held steadily over many miles, lands you somewhere entirely different than where the old course was taking you. That is the fourth key. Not a single great decree spoken once, but a whole ordinary day reclaimed, hour by hour, sentence by sentence, deposit by deposit, until the day itself becomes the prayer. I notice the old sentence, and I choose the new one, every single time. If this teaching is landing in you the way it is meant to, consider subscribing, so the next key finds you exactly when you need it. We return to speak the deeper ones soon, and I would rather you never miss one. The fifth key is this: stop apologizing for wanting more. Florence Scovel Shinn saw again and again in her students a strange, quiet habit, a kind of spiritual bowing, where the moment desire for more supply appeared, it was instantly followed by shame, as though wanting abundance were somehow in poor taste, as though the truly spiritual person should want less, ask for less, expect less, and she named this plainly as false humility, not real humility at all, but fear wearing the costume of virtue, because true humility, she taught, is simply recognizing that the supply was never yours to hoard or apologize for in the first place. It flows through you, not from you. So wanting more of it to flow through you is not greed. It is simply staying open. Notice how often the apology sneaks in. A person receives an unexpected check and says, almost immediately, "Oh, I don't deserve this." Or someone offers a raise and the first internal reaction is not gratitude but suspicion. What's the catch? This is not modesty. This is a closed hand pretending to be an open one. Picture a woman at a family dinner. Someone asks how her small business is doing, and though it is doing well, truly well, she hears herself say, "Oh, it's nothing. We're just scraping by," barely making it work. And she says this not because it is true, but because some old voice in her told her that saying, "I am doing well" out loud would sound boastful, would invite envy, would somehow be unspiritual. So she shrinks her own good news in front of the very people who love her. And Florence Scovel Shinn would say gently, that shrinking is not humility, it is a small betrayal of the truth, spoken out of fear dressed as modesty. And every time she shrinks it in words, she teaches her own consciousness to shrink it in fact. Notice too how this shows up in smaller ways all week long. The discount at checkout that you wave away instead of receiving warmly. The compliment on your success that you deflect instead of simply saying thank you. The friend who offers to pay for lunch, met instantly, with no, I couldn't possibly, when a simple thank you would have let the gift land. None of this is politeness. Florence Scovel Shinn taught. It is a lifelong flinch mistaken for grace. It is not wrong to want abundance. It is wrong to think wanting it makes you small. Ask yourself plainly this week, when supply increases, do you receive it standing tall? Or do you flinch and apologize on its way in, and the next time good arrives, however small, practice simply letting it land. No flinch, no disclaimer, no shrinking, just a quiet, open, unashamed yes. I receive freely, and I no longer apologize for supply. The sixth key is this: the old self that has always struggled must be allowed to dissolve. So the true self, the one supply already belongs to, can finally be free. And here it must be said clearly, this is never about literal death. It is never about harming anyone, least of all yourself. When Florence Scovel Shinn and the wisdom she carried speak of dying to the old self, they mean only this: the tired, frightened, scarcity-shaped version of you that you have been calling yourself for years, the one who flinches at bills, the one who says, "I am not good with money." That version was never the truth of who you are. It was a costume worn so long it started to feel like skin. And the sixth key asks you to let that costume finally fall away, not violently, but gently, the way a coat slips off the shoulders once the room has warmed. Think of a man who spent 20 years introducing himself, even just in his own private thoughts, as someone who struggles financially. That self-concept, Florence Scovel Shinn taught, is not a fixed fact. It is a garment, worn out of habit, and habits can be laid down. So the sixth key is a quiet ceremony you perform in your own mind, picturing the anxious, scarcity-bound self, thanking it honestly, because it did try to protect you in its limited way, and then setting it down, the way you would set down a heavy coat at the end of a long winter, and letting the true self step forward, the one Florence Scovel Shinn described as already whole, already supplied, already the very expression of "I am that I am." A child sits at the dinner table and hears a parent sigh over an envelope of bills and say, "We are just not the kind of people who get ahead." And the child, who has no defenses yet, no discernment yet, simply receives that sentence the way soft wax receives a seal, and 30 years later that same child, grown now, successful even, still feels a strange tightening in the chest every time money is discussed. Still hears a faint, inherited voice whispering that ease with money belongs to other families, not this one. And Florence Scovel Shinn would say gently, that voice is not prophecy, it is inheritance. And inheritance, unlike identity, can always be declined. You do not have to attend the funeral of a self-concept that was handed to you before you were old enough to consent to it. You are permitted, even now, especially now, to open the closet where that old coat has hung for decades. Take it down, look at it plainly, and say, "This was never actually mine," and set it outside the door. Or consider it from another angle entirely, a family gathering, the kind with a long table and a little too much conversation, and someone brings up an old family story. Remember how we never had money for anything growing up, and everyone laughs the tired laugh of shared history, and something in you nods along, because it feels like belonging. But notice what is actually happening in that laugh. You are renewing a membership you never actually chose to hold. You are signing an old lease on a house you no longer have to live in. Florence Scovel Shinn would tell you that you are allowed to love your family completely, to honor where you came from fully, and still quietly decline to keep wearing a story that was cut for someone else's shoulders. The past explains the coat. It does not require you to keep it on. Or consider it once more in the workplace. A woman stands at a networking event. Someone asks what she does, and before she can stop herself, she hears her own voice say, "Oh, I am just the assistant. I do not really deal with the money side of things." And notice, she was not asked whether she deals with the money side of things. She volunteered the smallness, unprompted, because the old coat, given the smallest opening, will always reach for the microphone first. It has had decades of practice speaking on her behalf, and Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is precisely why the sixth key cannot be a one-time decision made quietly in a journal. It must become a daily noticing, a willingness to catch the coat mid-sentence and say, "Not this time. That is not who I am anymore." Pause for a moment now, and picture your own version of that coat, not in the abstract, but in one specific sentence you have worn so long you barely notice its weight anymore. Maybe it was handed to you at a dinner table. Maybe it was stitched together in a hard season you never fully recovered from in speech, even after you recovered from it in life. See it clearly for a moment, and then, gently, take it off, not with force, not with shame at ever having worn it, simply the way you would slip out of a heavy coat the moment you finally noticed the room had warmed around you. And here is the piece so many miss entirely. The old self does not usually announce its own return with drama. It does not arrive shouting. It arrives quietly, in an offhand comment, in a joke at your own expense, in the reflex to shrink before anyone else has asked you to, in the small laugh at a family table, in the fast little sentence at a networking event. So the practice of the sixth key is not a single dramatic funeral held once. It is a gentle, repeated releasing. Every time the old fearful pattern lifts its head out of pure habit, you are permitted, without shame, without self-scolding, to simply say to it, kindly but firmly, "That is not who I am anymore. That self has died, and the true self, the one supply flows to easily, lives now in its place." And each time you say it, the coat gets a little lighter, a little easier to set down, until one day you reach for it out of old habit and discover, almost with surprise, that it is simply no longer there to put on. The old fearful self has died, and I live now as I am. The seventh key is this, and it is the deepest one, so let it unfold slowly, in pieces, the way a single flame can be looked at from many different angles, and still be one flame, and none of the angles are separate keys. They are simply the same key turning further into the lock. And I ask you to sit with this one a little longer than the others tonight, because it is not asking you to learn something new. It is asking you to finally believe something you have already been told. First, consider that I am is not simply a phrase you repeat. It is a description of a structure. And structures matter more than sentiments. God did not say, I am powerful, or I am wealthy, or I am supplied. God said, I am that I am, meaning the naming and the being are the very same motion. There is no gap between the declaration and the fact, no waiting room between the word and the world. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this same structure lives quietly in you as well. Whenever you say the two words I am, followed by anything at all, you are not describing some future possibility waiting to be earned. You are enacting a present fact, right now, in this very breath. This is why casual scarcity speech costs so much more than people realize, and why casual abundance speech carries so much more power than people ever suspect. Because it is not wishing, it is naming. And naming, inside this law, is instantaneous. So when you say, I am supplied, you are not filing a request for some future Tuesday. You are standing, this moment, inside the fact of it. Imagine two people standing at the very same kitchen counter, looking at the very same stack of mail. One says quietly, I am always drowning in this, and the other, facing an equally full stack, says quietly, I am the presence of supply moving through this house. The mail has not changed. The numbers printed on the envelopes have not changed. But two entirely different structures have just been spoken into two entirely different lives. And Florence Scovel Shinn would tell you plainly, the visible evidence may take a little longer to catch up. The check may arrive next week rather than this instant. The opportunity may take a few more days to appear, but the spiritual fact was completed the moment the true words were spoken with conviction. And here is something worth pausing over. This is not merely a difference of attitude. Attitude is often treated as a soft word, a pleasant mood laid over hard facts. But Florence Scovel Shinn was not describing mood. She was describing cause. The woman who says, I am the presence of supply, moving through this house, is not simply feeling better about her stack of mail. She is standing in a different location entirely, one where supply is the given and lack is the passing weather, while the other woman stands in a location where lack is the given and any relief is a rare and grateful exception. And you can live an entire lifetime, Florence Scovel Shinn taught, mistaking your location for your identity, thinking I am always drowning is simply who I am, when it was only ever where you had been standing, and any location, no matter how long you have stood in it, can be left. This is the first turn of the seventh key. Understanding that I am is never a wish, it is a location. And you, and only you, get to choose which room you are standing in today, and you are permitted to choose it again tomorrow, even if today's choosing feels unfamiliar at first. Second, consider that this ancient name is also a shield, not a shield that denies what is true, but a shield that refuses to let what is temporary rename what is eternal. Florence Scovel Shinn often spoke of decrees dissolving conditions that had looked fixed for years, and this name functions exactly the same way. When circumstances arrive that seem to demand a scarcity response, a large unexpected bill, a slow month, a client who cancels without warning, the old self rushes in first, the way an old servant rushes to answer a door out of pure habit, and it answers with, I am in trouble, I am going to fall behind, I am not going to make it, and this is precisely the moment the seventh key asks you to step in front of that old servant and answer the door yourself, not by denying that the bill exists. Denial has no part anywhere in this teaching. Florence Scovel Shinn was never a teacher of pretending, but by refusing to let the bill assign your identity. Picture the scene fully, because it is worth picturing fully. An envelope arrives in the afternoon mail, heavier than the others, and the amount printed inside is larger than expected. The old habit, the one trained by years of repetition, is a small jolt of fear, followed instantly by the sentence, I am not going to make it, And that sentence, spoken even quietly, even only in the mind, is a decree, spoken with the very same wand that speaks every other sentence. So the seventh key asks you instead, in that exact moment, to place your hand flat on the envelope, unopened if needed, and say quietly, "I am that I am, and my supply is equal to every demand made upon it," and only then to open it, and deal with the practical steps calmly. Notice carefully the order of operations here. Name first, then act. Never act first in panic and hope the true name catches up afterward, because the panic, left unspoken over, tends to write its own outcome long before the practical steps ever get their turn. And consider, too, how this same scene plays out over the telephone rather than the mailbox. A call comes in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. A service you depend on has raised its price without warning. And the voice on the other end is simply doing her job, reading from a script. And the old servant in you wants to answer with, "I cannot possibly manage this now. Everything is falling apart." And you can feel, if you are honest, how quickly that sentence wants to spread, how it wants to attach itself, not just to this one call, but to the whole shape of your week. And the shield is simply the choice, made in that very breath before you answer her, to say inwardly, "I am that I am. This is one call, not my whole life, and my supply meets it." And then to speak with the woman on the phone, calmly, practically, without the fear riding along underneath every word. And this shield is not reserved only for large dramatic bills. It works the very same way for the small daily frictions, the parking ticket, the appliance that breaks the same week as 3 other expenses, the friend who cancels a shared plan that cost money to arrange. In every one of these moments, something is trying to hand you a smaller name, and the shield is simply this: you do not have to accept every name that circumstance offers you. You are permitted, always, to look the circumstance in the eye and answer with the truer one. And the more often you do this, the less the circumstance even bothers to offer you the smaller name at all, because it has learned, so to speak, that you will not accept delivery. Third, consider that this name is also renewable, meaning it does not need to be earned once and displayed forever, like a medal on a shelf. It needs to be spoken again and again, the way breath is taken again and again, and the way a lamp needs oil poured in, again and again, to keep burning through the night. Florence Scovel Shinn never taught a one-time miracle cure that fixes a life permanently in a single sitting. She taught a daily practice, a returning, a habit built the way any strength is built, quietly, repeatedly, without drama. So there is no shame, none at all, in noticing that 3 weeks after learning this teaching, the old scarcity sentence tried to creep back in during a hard week. That is not failure. That is simply the old costume, out of long familiarity, trying itself on again in a tired moment. The way an old coat left in the closet will still fit if you forget and reach for it out of habit. And the answer, in every single instance, is never self-criticism. Self-criticism is simply another scarcity decree wearing a moral costume. The answer is only ever to speak the true name again, "I am that I am," as many times in a single day as it is needed, the same way you would never scold yourself for needing to eat again after having already eaten yesterday. You do not shame yourself for needing to breathe again after your last breath, and so there is no need to shame yourself for needing to declare again after your last declaration. This is the quiet mercy folded into the 7th key. It forgives forgetting completely. It only ever asks for returning. And here is something worth sitting with a little longer. Every time you return to the name, you are never starting over from zero. You are simply picking the very same sentence back up, exactly where you gently set it down. Nothing is lost in the gap. The practice does not reset. It accumulates. The way a garden does not start over each spring from bare soil, once it has been tended faithfully across several seasons. The roots are already there, deeper than they were the year before. Even if the surface looks briefly plain, and each return, Florence Scovel Shinn taught, comes a little easier than the one before it, a little more natural, a little less effortful, until one day, without any ceremony at all, without anyone announcing it, you notice that the true name has quietly become your first response instead of your effortful one. It simply rises first now, ahead of the old sentence, the way a native language rises ahead of a language you once had to translate word by word. Think of how strange it once felt to even attempt this practice, forcing the true name out past a throat still tight with the old fear. And think of how, given enough faithful returning, that same sentence eventually arrives before the fear even has time to fully form, arriving not as effort but as instinct. And that, in the end, is the whole aim of the seventh key. Not perfection, never perfection, but familiarity. Until I am that I am is no longer something you have to reach for across a great distance, but simply the address you already live at, the name that answers the door before the old servant even wakes, the name that was never really far away at all, only waiting, patiently, for you to remember you already carried the key to it in your own mouth. I am that I am, today, and again tomorrow, without shame in the returning. The eighth key is this: receive supply, the way you would receive a gift from someone who loves you, and guard the new name once you have spoken it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that gratitude is not simply good manners. It is an active force that keeps the channel of supply open, and that the fastest way to slow a demonstration already in motion is to receive it grudgingly, or worse, to receive it and immediately worry about losing it. And this is a subtlety most people never catch. Because the worry feels like responsibility. It feels like being careful with money. But underneath it is simply another decree of lack, spoken in a whisper instead of a shout. It is not that caution is wrong. It is that caution dressed as dread is simply fear wearing the uniform of prudence. Think of a woman who finally receives the raise she affirmed for months, and instead of resting in gratitude, spends the first week anxiously calculating how quickly it could be taken away, running numbers late at night, bracing for some unnamed reversal. That anxious calculating is itself a new decree, quietly undoing the very abundance just received. She has been handed an open door and stood in the doorway, apologizing for walking through it. So the eighth key asks you to notice, gently, whether your own hands are truly open when supply arrives, or whether they are cupped in the shape of receiving, while the heart underneath is still braced for loss. Consider an ordinary Thursday. A man finds an extra $20 refunded to his account, an error in his favor from a store months ago, quietly corrected. His first thought is not thank you. His first thought is, they will probably take it back. They will probably charge me double later. And he moves the money into savings, the way you would hide a stray animal you are not sure you are allowed to keep. Notice what has happened here. Supply arrived, small, but real, and instead of being welcomed, it was treated as a suspect. This is the exact posture Florence Scovel Shinn warned against, because the universe, she taught, is deeply courteous. It does not force its way into a home that keeps flinching at the door. It withdraws, instead, quietly, to wherever it is genuinely wanted. So imagine that same Thursday lived differently. The refund appears, and instead of suspicion, the words come easily. Thank you. This is exactly like supply, always finding its way to me. More is already on the way, said lightly, almost playfully. And that lightness is not naivety, it is trust. And trust, in this teaching, is the very texture that keeps the door propped open. Now consider a second story, further down the same road, because this key deserves more than one angle. A woman who owns a small dress shop finally lands a contract with a boutique across town. 3 years of quiet effort behind it, and the moment the email confirming it arrives, her very first feeling is not joy but dread. What if I cannot fulfill the order? What if this is the peak and it is all downhill from here? What if they change their mind? And she types back a reply, so hedged with apology and disclaimer that she nearly talks the boutique out of the very deal she prayed for. Florence Scovel Shinn would say she has confused humility with self-sabotage, because there is a world of difference between saying, "I will do my best," and this may fall through, and simply saying, "Thank you, I am ready," and letting the contract stand on its own solid ground. The second version does not deny that hard work lies ahead. It simply refuses to poison the beginning with the ending before the ending has arrived. And this is the exact discipline the eighth key asks of you, to let good news be good news, fully, before your mind rushes ahead to guard against its opposite. Florence Scovel Shinn called this practice active gratitude, not a passive feeling tucked quietly inside the chest, but a spoken one, said out loud, "Thank you for this supply, and more is coming," said the moment good arrives, however small, the parking spot that opens right in front of you when you were sure there would be none, the unexpected discount at the register, the check that arrives a day early, the stranger who pays a small kindness forward to you in a coffee line. Treat each one of these as a rehearsal, because how you receive small supply is quietly training how you will receive large supply. A person who cannot say thank you for $20 will very often find they do not know how to say thank you for 2,000 either. The muscle has simply never been used. It is not that the $20 matters in itself, it is that the posture you take toward it becomes the posture you will take toward everything larger that follows. Notice too how gratitude changes the very shape of waiting. A person who has affirmed supply and then waits with folded arms and a suspicious eye, checking each day to see whether the universe has failed them yet, is still living inside the old name even while reciting the new one. But a person who waits with open thanks, treating the supply as already settled in the unseen even before it shows itself in the mailbox, is living inside the very structure Florence Scovel Shinn described. And it is this quiet, steady, thankful waiting, far more than any anxious checking, that seems to shorten the distance between the words spoken and the evidence seen. And just as importantly, guard the new name you have been building through these keys, the way you would guard a small flame, cupped carefully against the wind. When a well-meaning relative says something discouraging about money at the dinner table, you do not have to argue, you do not have to correct them, you simply do not pick up their sentence and carry it home as your own. When an old friend sighs that the economy is terrible and nobody is getting ahead these days, you can listen kindly, nod even, and still quietly decline to let that become your personal decree over your personal life. When a news anchor speaks of shortage and collapse in the same tone used for weather, you can hear it without swallowing it. This is not arrogance, and it is not coldness toward the people you love. It is stewardship. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that you are the gatekeeper of your own consciousness, the only one who was ever truly appointed to that post, and no one else is permitted past that gate without your consent, however loudly they knock. And the eighth key simply asks you to take that gatekeeping seriously. Standing at your own door, receiving supply with open hands and open gratitude, while gently, without drama, declining to let borrowed fear move back into a house you have already begun to furnish with a truer name. I receive with gratitude, and I guard my new name with care. The ninth key is this, and it is the simplest one, because it is not new information, it is a decision. Every key spoken tonight was already true before you heard it. The name was always available, the supply was always moving. The only missing piece was your willingness to sign your own life with it daily, the way you would sign a letter. So the ninth key is simply this: let I am that I am be the signature at the bottom of every day. Not a phrase reserved for dramatic moments, but the quiet closing line you write under ordinary hours, under the grocery run, under the difficult phone call. under the quiet evening when nothing eventful happened at all. Sign it there too, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that consciousness is built in ordinary moments far more than in dramatic ones, and a life signed daily with the true name, over months, becomes a life visibly different from the one that used to be signed with fear. Think of the way a person signs their name on 100 small forms across a lifetime, a receipt, a birthday card, a lease, and never once thinks of it as significant, because it has become automatic. That is exactly what Florence Scovel Shinn wants for this name. Not a rare ceremony performed only in moments of crisis, but something so practiced it becomes automatic, something your own hand reaches for the way it reaches for a pen already in your pocket. Picture an ordinary evening. The dishes are done. The day was neither triumphant nor difficult, simply full, and instead of letting the day close in silence, or worse, in some tired, unconscious mutter about how tired you are of money always being tight, you pause for one breath, and you say quietly, "I am that I am," and this day, ordinary as it was still held inside supply. That is the whole practice. No candles required, no special hour, just the willingness to close each day the way you would close a letter to someone who matters, with your true name at the bottom. And here is what makes this ninth key so quietly powerful. It does not ask you to feel differently before you sign. It only asks you to sign. The feeling of certainty tends to arrive after the practice, not before it. The way confidence in handwriting comes after years of writing the same signature, not before the first attempt. So you will not become a different person overnight. You will simply become more and more fully the person you already were, underneath the old costume, supplied, whole, unafraid. And the beautiful part is that this signature never runs out of ink. You can use it again tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, for the rest of your life, and it will answer every single time, because it always has. It answered Moses at the bush, and it will answer you tonight, at your own kitchen table, over your own small ordinary evening, over your own quiet page. I am that I am, and this is the name I sign over my whole life. Here is the whole picture. It is not that money has been withholding itself from you. It is that your own tongue has been withholding the true name from your money. It is not that scarcity is a fact about the world. It is a sentence repeated so often it hardened into a habit of speech. It is not that wanting more supply makes you small. It is that apologizing for it was the only thing making you small. It is not that circumstances get to name you. It is that you have been handing them the pen without noticing. It is not that the old frightened self was your identity. It is only a costume that can be laid down. It is not that this name works once and fades. It is that it renews every single time you return to it. It is not that gratitude is a nicety. It is the very thing that keeps the channel open. And it is not that any of these were 9 separate keys at all. They were 9 turns of the very same key. The one Florence Scovel Shinn placed in your hand tonight. I am that I am, spoken with conviction over the one place you had almost never dared to speak it, your money. And if you want a companion for this practice, something to hold you steady on the days the old sentences try to creep back, we built the Overflow Covenant for exactly that. A daily guided practice in speaking the true name over your supply, gentle enough for a beginner, deep enough for years of return. It is available now for a simple one-time gift of $33, fully covered by our happiness guarantee. If it is not for you, you receive every dollar back, no questions asked. You will find the link in the description below, and I would love to walk this daily practice with you there. I am that I am. I am the presence of infinite supply moving through my life right now. My word is my wand. And as you go from here, carry the name gently. Speak it over the small moments and the large ones alike. And let your money finally hear, from your own mouth, the very name heaven has been waiting to answer to all along.